I'm a 29-year-old male, and I just got married a couple of weeks ago. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, but it turned into something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I've been replaying everything in my mind, and after reading a lot of similar stories online, I feel like I need to share what happened. Maybe it'll help me process everything. Let me start with some context. My parents divorced when I was 12. It wasn't a shock. My dad had been distant for years. But what had surprised me was how quickly he moved on. Within 6 months, he introduced me to Amy, a woman he met through work. Amy was nothing like my mom. She was loud, opinionated, and always seemed to have an agenda. As a kid, I tried to like her, but she made it impossible. She'd talk over me when I was trying to have a moment with my dad and made subtle digs about my mom whenever she thought I wasn't listening. By the time I hit my teenage years, my relationship with my dad was strained, and Amy didn't help. She had this way of inserting herself into every aspect of my life, often spinning things to make me look like the difficult one. If I tried to set boundaries, it somehow became a conversation about how ungrateful I was for all her efforts. Over time, I started pulling away. By the time I left for college, I only saw my dad on holidays and the occasional family event. Fast forward to last year. I got engaged to my now wife, Emma. Emma's amazing, kind, supportive, and someone who always makes me feel like I'm home. We decided we wanted a small wedding, something intimate with just close friends and family. Planning it was a dream, but as anyone who's been through it knows, there's always drama. Ours? It centered around my dad and Amy. From the start, I made it clear that Amy was not invited. I didn't make this decision lightly. Over the years, she'd managed to alienate not just me, but also my siblings and even some of my dad's extended family. Emma and I wanted a stress-free day, and having Amy there would guarantee the opposite. When I called my dad to tell him about the wedding, I explained this to him. He didn't take it well. At first, he tried to play the understanding parent. He RSVP'd and said he'd come alone, but there was this tone in his voice that made me uneasy. Over the next few weeks, he brought Amy up in nearly every conversation, making comments like, "She really wanted to be there for you," or "I hope you know how much this is hurting her." I brushed it off at first, thinking he'd come around. But as the wedding got closer, the guilt trips became more frequent. He called one night, suggesting that maybe Amy could just stop by for the reception. I shut that down immediately. Then he tried another angle, asking if it was fair to make him choose between his wife and his son. I told him it wasn't about choosing, it was about respecting the boundaries I'd set. After that, he went quiet. For the last month before the wedding, I barely heard from him. The big day finally arrived. Emma looked stunning, the venue was perfect, and everything seemed to be going smoothly. I noticed my dad as soon as he walked into the ceremony. He was alone, just like he'd promised, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a wave of relief. Maybe he'd finally gotten the message, but that relief didn't last long. During the reception, as Emma and I were making our rounds, I spotted Amy. She was standing near the buffet, chatting with some of my cousins like she belonged there. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things. Why would she be here? But no, it was definitely her, and she was making herself comfortable. I excused myself and went looking for my dad. When I found him, he didn't even look surprised to see me. He just shrugged and said he couldn't leave her at home. He tried to brush it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, and that no one else seemed to mind. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After weeks of explaining, after everything I'd made clear, he still decided to do what he wanted. I told him they both needed to leave. He started arguing, saying I was overreacting and that kicking them out would cause a scene. By this point, Emma had joined us, and she didn't hesitate to back me up. The three of us stood there, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife, while some guests started noticing the commotion. Eventually, my dad and Amy left, but not without making it clear how upset they were. My dad muttered something about how I was ruining my own wedding as he walked out. It was humiliating. I tried to shake it off and focus on the people who were there to celebrate with us, but the damage was done. I spent the rest of the night putting on a brave face, even though I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. That's how my wedding day went from perfect to unforgettable for all the wrong reasons. And that's just the beginning of this mess. Update 1. The reception was supposed to be the fun part of the wedding, a chance to celebrate, dance, and enjoy the moment with people we love. Instead, it turned into something straight out of a bad reality show. After spotting Amy at the buffet, I went straight to my dad. The confrontation didn't take long to escalate. By the time Emma joined me, it was clear this wasn't going to end quietly. Emma didn't hesitate. She firmly told my dad and Amy they needed to leave. A small crowd had started forming nearby, and I could feel the weight of their stares. My dad's reaction wasn't subtle. He raised his voice, accusing us of being ungrateful and overdramatic. Amy stood off to the side, arms crossed, wearing a smug expression like she knew this was exactly what she wanted to happen. At one point, my dad tried to guilt trip me, talking about all the sacrifices he made for me growing up and how I was repaying him by humiliating him in front of family. Emma wasn't having it. She stepped closer, keeping her voice calm but firm, and repeated that they needed to leave. Amy finally spoke up, trying to paint herself as the victim, claiming she was only there to support my dad and didn't mean to cause any problems. It was clear we weren't going to reach any kind of resolution standing there in the middle of the reception. My dad made a big show of throwing his hands up, loudly proclaiming that he was done with this nonsense. He stormed out, dragging Amy along with him, but not before making a scene on his way out. He muttered something about how he couldn't believe his son would treat him this way, loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. I noticed a few cousins exchanging awkward glances, clearly unsure of what to do or say. After they left, I felt this overwhelming mix of relief and embarrassment. Emma and I tried to shift the focus back to the celebration, but the mood had definitely taken a hit. Thankfully, our close friends were incredible. A couple of them pulled us aside, offering words of encouragement and making jokes to lighten the mood. One even got the DJ to play Emma's favorite song to get people back on the dance floor. Slowly, things started to feel a little more normal, but I couldn't shake the tension lingering in the air. By the next morning, the fallout had already started. I woke up to a slew of notifications on my phone. My dad had taken to social media, posting a vague, passive-aggressive message about how some people don't understand the meaning of family and how he always puts others first but gets nothing in return. The post was clearly about the wedding, and it didn't take long for people to start commenting. Some of my extended family chimed in, and while a few defended him, others asked for the full story. It was a mess. It didn't stop there. Amy had also posted, tagging my dad in a long-winded rant about how she tried so hard to be accepted but was constantly shut out. She described me as controlling and disrespectful, painting herself as a saint who was unfairly treated. Reading it made my blood boil, but Emma reminded me to take a step back and not engage. The family group chat was the next battlefield. It started with a simple message from one of my aunts, asking what had happened at the wedding. Within minutes, it snowballed into a full-blown argument. My mom chimed in, explaining that I'd set boundaries and my dad had chosen to ignore them. My dad's siblings jumped in, some backing him up, others taking my side. One of my cousins even pointed out how Amy always seemed to create drama wherever she went. Amid the chaos, my mom called me privately. She was supportive, saying I'd done nothing wrong, but she also warned me about the potential long-term fallout. She reminded me how stubborn my dad could be and how this might create a permanent rift in the family. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but I appreciated her honesty. As the day went on, I started second-guessing myself. Did I overreact? Could I have handled the situation differently? The guilt was eating at me, so I decided to do what countless others have done in my shoes. I turned to Reddit. I wrote out a detailed post about what happened, laying out the events as objectively as I could. I didn't expect much, maybe a handful of comments, but within hours, the post blew up. The responses were overwhelming. Most people agreed that my dad had crossed a line and that Amy had no business being there. A few commenters shared their own stories about difficult family members, and their words really resonated with me. Some even suggested cutting contact with my dad entirely, though I wasn't sure I was ready for that. Still, it was comforting to know I wasn't alone. By the end of the day, I felt a little more at peace with what had happened. I couldn't control how my dad or Amy reacted, but I could control how I moved forward. Little did I know, this was only the beginning of the fallout. Update 2. The fallout from the wedding didn't slow down after the initial explosion. A few days later, my dad sent me a text. At first glance, it looked like an apology, but as I read it, the tone became clear. He started with, "I'm sorry for how things turned out," but quickly pivoted to how I'd blown everything out of proportion and how Amy was only there because she didn't want him to feel alone. It wasn't the apology I was hoping for, and it didn't address any of the boundaries I had set. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I decided to go low contact for the time being. I muted his texts and ignored his calls, focusing on settling into married life with Emma. I let a few close family members know what was going on, just to avoid any miscommunication. To my surprise, several of them reached out to me privately with messages of support. They had been at the wedding and had witnessed the confrontation. One of my uncles even mentioned that he'd never liked Amy and that she had a habit of stirring up drama at family gatherings. Emma's family was equally supportive. Her parents called us over for dinner and made a point to let us know how proud they were of how we handled things. They couldn't believe my dad and Amy had shown up knowing they weren't welcome. Emma's mom, who was normally very soft-spoken, actually called their behavior shameless, which made us laugh. It felt good to have a solid support system during all of this. In the middle of all this, one of my cousins suggested family counseling. She said it might help us communicate better and work through the issues with my dad and Amy. I wasn't sure if that was the right move. My dad had shown no signs of wanting to truly mend things, and Amy's behavior only made it harder to even consider sitting down with them in a controlled setting. Speaking of Amy, she was still on a roll. Her online posts were relentless. She shared vague updates about toxic family members and how people need to look in the mirror before judging others. In one post, she went as far as to tag mutual friends and family, which only added fuel to the fire. A few relatives started calling her out in the comments, which turned her posts into mini war zones. It was exhausting to watch, even from a distance. Emma and I made a decision after all this. Going forward, we were going to be even more selective about who we included in family events. If someone couldn't respect our boundaries, they wouldn't be invited. It wasn't just about Amy anymore. It was about ensuring that our lives were as peaceful and drama-free as possible. It felt like the only way to move forward. With the online chaos still brewing, I decided to post a follow-up on Reddit. My first post had gotten a lot of attention, and I wanted to clarify some of the details for the people who had been following along. I explained how my dad's text wasn't a real apology, and how Amy's online behavior was making things worse. The post blew up even more than the first one. The comment section was full of people sharing similar stories and offering advice. It felt strange to have so many strangers weighing in on my family drama, but their support was comforting. One of the most surprising developments came from my younger sister. She texted me after seeing my Reddit update and shared her own frustrations with our dad and Amy. She told me about times when Amy had undermined her as well, often going behind her back to our dad to stir up trouble. Hearing her perspective solidified my decision to go low contact. It wasn't just me. Amy had been a consistent problem for years. Emma played a big role in helping me stay grounded during all of this. She reminded me that our focus should be on building our life together and not letting this drama consume us. She suggested we set clear boundaries with my dad and leave the door open for reconciliation only if he was willing to respect them. It was sound advice, but the idea of actually giving him an ultimatum made me uneasy. Still, I started drafting a message. I wrote out everything I wanted to say, how I felt about what happened, the boundaries I needed moving forward, and what it would take for us to have a relationship again. I didn't send it right away. I wanted to get it right and make sure I wasn't acting out of anger. As I worked through the draft, I kept reading the comments on my Reddit post. People shared stories about estranged parents, manipulative step-parents, and the hard decisions they'd had to make to protect their peace. Their experiences helped me see that setting boundaries wasn't just about pushing people away, it was about protecting myself and the life Emma and I were building. For now, I'm taking things one step at a time. I haven't sent the message yet, but I'm getting closer to a decision. The support I've gotten from Emma, her family, my sister, and even strangers online has been incredible. It's made me realize that no matter how this plays out, I'm not alone in this. The next step is coming, and I'm ready for it. Update 3. After days of editing and rewriting, I finally sent the message to my dad. It was as clear and respectful as I could make it, but I didn't hold back on what needed to be said. I told him how his actions had hurt me, how he had crossed boundaries I'd set for my wedding, and how I needed him to respect those boundaries if we were going to move forward. I emphasized that this wasn't about Amy, even though she played a big role in the conflict. It was about his choices and how they impacted me. The reply came within an hour. It wasn't what I hoped for. Instead of addressing anything I'd said, my dad brushed it off. He called me too emotional and suggested I was making a big deal out of nothing. He claimed that bringing Amy to the wedding was about not leaving her out and that I'd overreacted. Reading it, I realized he wasn't ready to take any accountability for his actions. That's when I made the decision to give him an ultimatum. I wrote back, laying everything out clearly. If he couldn't respect my boundaries and acknowledge how his actions affected me, then I couldn't continue a relationship with him. I wasn't cutting him off completely, not yet, but I made it clear that things had to change, or we'd be headed in that direction. Shortly after, my sister called me. She'd heard about the message from my dad, who was venting to her about how unreasonable I was being. To my surprise, she fully supported my decision. She even shared more stories of how Amy had caused problems in her life, like making passive-aggressive comments during family gatherings or trying to interfere in her personal relationships. Hearing my sister validate my feelings gave me a sense of relief. It wasn't just me, but my dad wasn't done. A day later, he sent me another message, this time bringing up old wounds from the divorce. He accused me of being manipulated by my mom and suggested that my decisions were influenced by her negative energy. It was a classic deflection, and it only solidified my resolve. My mom, when I told her about it, reminded me that this was how my dad had always handled conflict, by shifting blame instead of addressing the issue. She urged me to be careful not to burn bridges completely, but I could tell she understood why I was frustrated. Emma, as always, had my back. She gently suggested that we might need to step back entirely from the drama until my dad was willing to approach the situation differently. Her reasoning was simple: we couldn't keep letting his actions disrupt our lives. It was hard to argue with her logic, especially as the situation kept escalating. Not long after, Amy decided to make her next move. She sent me a long email. The tone was condescending, filled with phrases like "for your own good and you'll regret this one day." She blamed me for alienating my dad and accused me of being selfish. It was the final straw. I blocked her on every platform and didn't bother responding. The decision to go no contact with both my dad and Amy wasn't easy, but it felt necessary. I let him know that I wouldn't be engaging with either of them until there was a real effort to acknowledge what had happened and respect the boundaries I'd set. His response was silence at first, but the fallout was far from over. I updated Reddit about the situation, sharing the ultimatum, my dad's reaction, and the decision to go no contact. The post exploded, drawing even more attention than my previous updates. People shared their own experiences with difficult parents and step-parents, and the advice was overwhelmingly in favor of sticking to my boundaries. The validation was comforting, but it was bittersweet knowing how messy things had become with my dad. As expected, the extended family began taking sides. Some relatives reached out to me privately, expressing their support and sharing their own frustrations with Amy. Others, however, pressured me to reconcile. A few even suggested I apologize to keep the peace, which only added to the stress. One of my aunts, who I've always been close to, reached out with a different perspective. She told me about her own run-ins with Amy and how my dad had always enabled her behavior. She validated my feelings and reminded me that it wasn't my responsibility to fix the situation, especially when I was the one being disrespected. Blocking Amy seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. My dad started reaching out to mutual friends and family, trying to paint me as ungrateful and unreasonable. He told them that I was punishing him and that I'd let my mom and Emma poison my view of him. Some of the messages made their way back to me, but I chose not to respond. The drama was exhausting, and I didn't want to give it any more energy. Instead, I focused on healing. Emma and I threw ourselves into creating a positive, drama-free environment at home. We planned a small weekend getaway to unplug and reconnect, which was exactly what we needed. It felt good to put some distance between us and the chaos, even if only for a little while. I don't know what the future holds with my dad, but for now, I'm focusing on my marriage and the people who genuinely support us. The door isn't completely closed, but if he wants to be a part of my life, he'll need to walk through it on my terms. For now, that's enough. Update 4. Weeks after I went no contact with my dad and Amy, a package arrived at our door. Inside was a wedding gift, a high-end espresso machine that clearly cost a lot. Tucked under it was a handwritten note from my dad. It was short, asking if we could put everything behind us and move forward. There was no mention of the wedding drama, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just a vague call for peace. Emma and I stared at the gift for a while, unsure of what to do. On one hand, it felt like an olive branch, but on the other, it was hard to ignore the lack of accountability. I left the box unopened in the corner of the kitchen and tried to focus on other things, but the gesture kept nagging at me. That night, Emma and I talked about what to do next. She suggested therapy, not just for me, but as a way to figure out how to navigate the situation with my dad. I wasn't sure at first, but the idea stuck. A few days later, I found a counselor who specialized in family dynamics and scheduled an individual session. The first session was eye-opening. The counselor helped me unpack the years of tension between my dad and me, the role Amy had played in it, and how the wedding drama had brought everything to a boiling point. It didn't fix anything overnight, but it gave me a better understanding of why I was so conflicted. Around this time, my sister and I met up for coffee. She had been keeping her distance from our dad too and told me she was considering going fully no contact. She shared stories about how he had been trying to guilt trip her, much like he had done with me, and how Amy's behavior had pushed her to the edge. It was clear that the strain wasn't just on me, it was on our entire family. Not long after, I found out that my dad had been trying to bypass me by reaching out to my sister directly. He sent her long texts about how he missed us and wished we could all be a family again. My sister, to her credit, stood firm and didn't let him drag her into the drama, but it only added to the tension between us all. Meanwhile, Amy's social media antics were finally catching up to her. Her posts about toxic family members and being shut out for no reason started to backfire as mutual acquaintances began calling her out. Some even commented directly, pointing out that she'd overstepped at the wedding and had no right to play the victim. The comments eventually stopped, and her account went quiet, which was a small but welcome relief. Then, out of the blue, my dad sent me a text. It was short and to the point, apologizing for the hurt caused and asking if we could talk. It wasn't perfect, but it felt sincere, more so than anything else I'd received from him in months. I decided to take it as a small step forward. Around this time, one of my aunts offered to mediate a conversation between my dad and me. She was one of the few family members who had stayed neutral throughout the drama, and I trusted her judgment. After some thought, I agreed, but only on the condition that Amy wouldn't be involved. My dad surprisingly accepted. Before the meeting, I laid out clear ground rules. I wouldn't tolerate deflection, guilt tripping, or any attempts to shift blame onto me, Emma, or my mom. The conversation had to focus on what happened and how we could move forward. My aunt relayed these conditions to my dad, and he agreed. The meeting itself was tense. We met at my aunt's house, and from the moment I walked in, the air felt heavy. My dad started with another apology, which was a good sign, but it didn't take long for him to veer into familiar territory. He brought up how family should stick together and hinted that I should have been more understanding of Amy's feelings. I held my ground, reminding him of the boundaries I had set and how he had knowingly crossed them. For the first time, my dad seemed to genuinely listen. He admitted he'd made a mistake bringing Amy to the wedding and that he hadn't fully considered how it would affect me. He asked for patience as he worked on navigating his relationship with her while trying to mend things with me. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it felt like progress. Notably, Amy was absent from the meeting. I don't know if that was my dad's decision or hers, but either way, it made the conversation easier. Without her there, the focus stayed on us, and we were able to have a more honest discussion. By the end of the meeting, I agreed to take small steps toward rebuilding my relationship with my dad. I wasn't ready to jump back into regular contact, but I told him I'd be open to future conversations if he continued to respect my boundaries. Afterward, I updated Reddit about what had happened. The responses were mixed. Some people encouraged me to keep trying, while others warned me to stay cautious. For now, I'm approaching the situation with cautious optimism. It's still a long road ahead, but at least there's a glimmer of hope. Update 5. Since the mediated meeting with my dad, I've been navigating a new kind of relationship with him, limited, but functional. We've kept communication light, mostly exchanging the occasional text or phone call. I've made it clear that I'm not interested in rehashing old conflicts or involving Amy in our conversations. So far, he's stuck to those boundaries, though our contact remains minimal. Therapy has been a game changer throughout all of this. My counselor has helped me recognize patterns in my dad's behavior, how he uses guilt and deflection to avoid accountability, and how I've unconsciously played into those dynamics over the years. More importantly, I've learned how to disengage from those patterns and prioritize my mental health. It's been liberating to shift my focus away from fixing the relationship and towards simply maintaining healthy boundaries. Interestingly, Amy seems to have taken a step back. Since her social media posts started backfiring, she's gone quiet online. I haven't heard from her directly, and mutual relatives have mentioned that she stopped bringing up the wedding drama at family gatherings. Whether it's genuine or just a tactical retreat, I don't know, but it's made things a lot less stressful. The first big test of my new approach came with the holidays. My dad extended an invitation for Emma and me to join his family for Thanksgiving. Amy would be hosting at their house. It didn't take long to decide. We politely declined. Instead, we spent Thanksgiving with Emma's family, surrounded by warmth, laughter, and absolutely no drama. It was the most relaxed holiday I've had in years, and I didn't miss the tension that would have inevitably come with seeing my dad and Amy. My sister has been on a similar journey. She's remained low contact with our dad and has avoided gatherings where Amy is present. We've grown closer through this shared experience, often leaning on each other for support and validation. It's been comforting to know I'm not the only one setting boundaries. In the meantime, Emma and I have been focusing on building a strong support system. Our friends have been incredible, always there to listen, offer advice, or just distract us with a good time. Emma's family has welcomed me with open arms, making me feel like I belong in a way I never quite felt in my own family. These relationships have been a reminder that family isn't always about blood. It's about the people who show up for you when it matters most. My dad has made a few attempts to reconnect, but they've felt superficial. He'll send a random text asking how I'm doing or sharing an article he thinks I might like. While I appreciate the effort, it's clear that these gestures are more about maintaining appearances than genuine reconciliation. For now, I'm content with keeping things surface level. The deeper conversations will only happen if he's willing to address the past honestly, and I'm not holding my breath for that. One surprising development has been the complete silence from Amy. Not only has she stopped posting about the situation, but she hasn't made any attempts to reach out to me directly. I've heard through the grapevine that the extended family's backlash hit her harder than expected, which might explain her retreat. It's been a relief to not have her stirring the pot for once. Reflecting on everything, I've realized how much I've grown through this ordeal. The old me might have bent over backward to keep the peace, even at the expense of my own well-being. Now, I'm more assertive and confident in standing up for myself. It's been a tough journey, but it's shown me the importance of valuing my own boundaries and mental health. Looking back on my wedding day, I can finally separate the good from the bad. Despite the drama, there were so many beautiful moments. Emma walking down the aisle, the heartfelt speeches, dancing with our friends late into the night. Those are the memories I choose to hold on to. The rest is just a reminder of why boundaries are so important. Before I wrap up this saga, I want to take a moment to thank the Reddit community. Sharing my story here and reading your comments has been an unexpected source of strength. Your advice, encouragement, and even your tough love have helped me navigate one of the most challenging chapters of my life. I genuinely don't think I would have handled things as well without this outlet. As for the future, I've made a firm decision. I won't attend any family event where Amy is present unless she offers a genuine apology. My dad knows this, and I've made it clear that this boundary isn't negotiable. If he chooses to respect it, great. If not, I'm at peace with whatever distance that creates. For now, I'm focusing on the life Emma and I are building together. We're planning a small vacation soon, just the two of us, to celebrate surviving the chaos and coming out stronger. It feels like a fresh start, and for the first time in a long time, I'm excited for what's ahead. To anyone reading this who's dealing with similar family struggles, you're not alone, and it's okay to prioritize your happiness. Sometimes the best thing you can do is step back, set boundaries, and let go of what you can't control. Thank you all for following along on this journey. This is my final update, and I can truly say I'm moving forward with a sense of closure and peace. I'm a 32-year-old guy, and after years of hard work, saving every penny and making sacrifices, I finally bought my dream home. It's nothing extravagant, but it's mine. A spacious house with a big backyard, located in a peaceful neighborhood. I've put a lot into making it exactly how I want it, and honestly, I love having my own space. Now, let me give you some background on my family. I'm the responsible one, the guy who always had to step up. My younger sister Emily 28F has always been the golden child. She's the type who gets whatever she wants, and my parents bend over backward for her. Growing up, I was expected to understand when she got special treatment because she was younger, or because she was going through something, or just because that's how siblings should be. A few months ago, Emily got engaged to her fiancé, Jake. Everyone in the family was thrilled, except for me, not because I wasn't happy for her, but because Emily and I have never been close. She's always been entitled, throwing tantrums when things don't go her way, and I learned early on to keep my distance. Jake seems like a decent guy, but honestly, I have no idea how he puts up with her. Anyway, as soon as the engagement was announced, the wedding planning began. And when I say wedding planning, I mean a full-blown Pinterest board, Instagram-worthy spectacle. The problem? Emily wants a fairy tale wedding, but she and Jake don't exactly have a fairy tale budget. They started touring venues, but every place they liked was too expensive. My parents, who had promised to help, quickly realized that funding Emily's dream wedding wasn't as easy as they thought. That's when they came up with an idea, and by idea I mean a problem for me. One evening, my mom casually brought up how perfect my house would be for the wedding. She said it had the space, the beautiful backyard, and it would save Emily so much money. At first, I thought she was joking. She wasn't. I shut it down immediately. No hesitation. I told them that my house wasn't a wedding venue, and that I wasn't comfortable with it. I barely even have guests over, let alone 100+ people stomping through my home. My mom immediately went into disappointed parent mode, telling me it was just one day, and that I should be honored to be a part of Emily's big moment. Then came the waterworks. Emily, who had been quiet until now, burst into tears, saying I was ruining her dream wedding. She started sobbing about how she had already pictured walking down the aisle in my backyard, how she just knew it was meant to be. My dad jumped in, shaking his head at me like I was some kind of heartless monster. "It's your sister's wedding," he said. "You can't do this one small thing for her, except it's not a small thing. It's my house." And I knew exactly what would happen if I said yes. See, my family isn't the respectful guest type. Every family gathering growing up ended with something broken, a huge mess left behind, and my parents acting like it was just normal family behavior. I could already imagine what would happen. Spilled drinks, people wandering through my rooms, furniture getting damaged, kids running wild, and me stuck cleaning up afterward, while my parents shrugged and said, "Well, it's just a little mess." And then there were the logistics. Weddings don't just happen. Who's paying for rentals, tents, extra restrooms, catering, parking arrangements? I knew exactly how this would play out. They'd tell me not to worry about it, but then, bit by bit, the costs and responsibilities would start falling on me. So I stood my ground. I told them my decision wasn't changing. Cue the next phase, guilt tripping. My mom started ranting about how I was tearing the family apart over something so trivial. Emily went back to crying, saying I was making her miserable on what was supposed to be the happiest time of her life. My dad kept repeating how selfish I was being. They tried every argument possible, how I didn't even have to do anything, how I should want to help my sister, how family means sacrifice. But none of them, not one, offered to take responsibility for damages or expenses. Not one of them even considered what I wanted. It was all about what was best for Emily. Emily shot down every alternative venue. My parents suggested, "It won't be the same," she whined. "No place is as beautiful as your home." My mom nodded, but even she looked uneasy. "We'll figure something out," she muttered, though it was clear they had no plan B. When I still wouldn't budge, things got worse. My parents started sending texts, long paragraphs about how disappointed they were in me, how they had raised me better than this, how I was choosing a house over my own sister. Then extended family got involved. Out of nowhere, aunts, uncles, and cousins started calling and messaging me, all with the same theme. "It's just one day. Why are you making this a big deal?" Clearly my parents had been spreading their side of the story. I ignored them all. But then the final straw, Emily tried one more time. She sent me a dramatic text about how she would never forgive me if I didn't let her have the wedding at my house. She said she would never be able to look at me the same way again, that I was proving I didn't care about her happiness. At that point I was done. I texted back one sentence, "Then I guess you'll have to stop looking at me." Blocked her number. Blocked my parents' numbers. Blocked every flying monkey they sent my way. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Of course I knew this wasn't over. I knew my family wasn't the type to let things go. But I also knew one thing for sure. My house is mine, and they are not getting their way. After shutting down my family's wedding venue plans, I knew they wouldn't take it well, but I wasn't expecting them to go completely silent. No texts, no calls, nothing. It was like they had collectively decided to pretend I didn't exist. At first it was peaceful, no more guilt-tripping messages, no more emotional blackmail, but then the flying monkeys arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins, people I barely spoke to, suddenly cared about my sister's wedding. They called, texted, even sent long Facebook messages about how I was being unreasonable and how it's just one day. Some tried to guilt-trip me by saying Emily was so heartbroken that she couldn't even eat or sleep. Others took a more aggressive approach, calling me selfish and saying family means sacrifice. One aunt even tried the parental disappointment card, saying my mom was devastated and that she'd never seen her this sad before. It was all manipulation, and I wasn't falling for it. Then Emily took her tantrum to social media. She posted a long dramatic status about family betrayal and people who only care about themselves. She didn't name me, but it was obvious. The comments were full of sympathy, people calling her strong and saying she deserves better. One of her friends even wrote, "I can't believe your own family is treating you like this." The best part, my own parents were commenting, agreeing with everything she said. I ignored it, but then came the unexpected twist. Jake, her fiancé, reached out. He messaged me privately, apologizing for everything. He said he didn't realize how much stress this was causing and wanted to smooth things over. But then came the real reason for the message. He asked me to reconsider. He assured me that he and Emily would be so grateful if I just let them use the backyard. He promised they'd take care of everything, that they'd make sure no one stepped inside the house. He even tried to sweeten the deal by saying they'd pay for damages if anything happened. But that's when I learned something that made my blood boil. He casually mentioned that my parents had planned to move a huge portion of the wedding expenses onto me. Not just the venue, they were expecting me to cover tents, catering, and even extra restrooms for guests. They never mentioned any of this when they were demanding I let them use my house. I shut Jake down politely, but firmly. The answer was still no. Days later, a new offer came from my parents. They said I was overreacting and suggested a compromise. They'd only use the backyard. I wouldn't have to do anything. Yeah, right. They'd take care of everything again. Sure, except the backyard is still my property. There would still be strangers everywhere, noise and trash left behind. and I knew exactly how this would play out. First, they'd promised to keep it outside. Then, suddenly they'd need access to the kitchen. Then the bathrooms. Then, before I knew it, half the guests would be inside my house, touching my things, treating my home like a public space. I refused again, and that's when things got worse. One of my neighbors, an older guy who owns a small cafe nearby, pulled me aside one afternoon. He told me he had overheard Emily bragging about her wedding plans at my house. She was talking loudly to a friend about how she was going to make it work no matter what. When her friend asked how, Emily laughed and said, "I'll take care of it." That was enough for me to take precautions. I installed security cameras and changed every lock in the house. I wasn't taking any chances. And it's a good thing I did, because that's when I found out about the spare key. Apparently, my parents had given Emily a spare key to my house years ago. Without my knowledge, I only found out when I confronted them directly. They acted confused at first, then defensive. My mom brushed it off, saying they must have misplaced it. My dad told me I was being dramatic, and that I shouldn't act like my own family can't be trusted. I demanded the key back. That's when my mom admitted they didn't know where it was anymore. I was done playing nice. I told them if I ever caught anyone trying to enter my house without permission, I'd call the cops. No more discussions. No more, but it's just family. Trespassing is trespassing. Emily found out soon after, and that's when the real meltdown happened. That night, Emily called me screaming. She wasn't crying anymore, she was furious. She couldn't believe I would go so far as to change the locks and threaten legal action. She flat out admitted she had planned to go ahead with the wedding at my house anyway. I told her she had no right to make decisions about my house. Her response? "I don't deserve such a nice home if I won't share it." She actually said that because I wouldn't hand my house over, I didn't deserve to have it. That's when I gave my final warning. If she or my parents tried anything else, I was done. I told them if they kept pushing, I'd cut all contact. The response? More guilt tripping. My parents doubled down, saying I was destroying the family over something so small. My mom even threw in the classic family means sacrifice line again. But at this point, I saw them for what they were. They didn't care about me. They didn't care about my space, my boundaries, or my peace. They only cared about what they could take from me. So now I'm considering legal action, because if Emily was willing to go behind my back once, what's stopping her from trying something else? After the screaming match with Emily and laying down my final warning, something unexpected happened. Silence. No texts, no phone calls, no guilt-tripping messages. Even Emily's dramatic Facebook posts stopped. My parents, who had been relentless about getting me to do the right thing, went silent. It felt almost like an admission of defeat, but knowing them, it was probably just a tactical retreat. I wondered if, deep down, they had a shred of regret, but if they did, they'd never admit it. Then, a few days later, my cousin Riley reached out. Unlike the rest of my extended family, Riley had never been one to meddle, but this time, his message was urgent. Emily was still planning to have the wedding at my house. Not only that, she had already sent out invitations listing my address as the venue. I didn't believe it at first. It sounded too insane, even for Emily. But then, Riley sent me a photo of an actual invitation. Right there, in fancy lettering, was my home address under venue. I felt like I was losing my mind. Emily had gone completely behind my back, fully expecting that I would just come around when the day arrived. She had no backup plan, no alternative venue. She had just decided my house was hers to use. Not even an hour later, I got another confirmation. One of the guests messaged me directly. They wanted to confirm if the wedding was still happening at my place, because they hadn't received any follow-ups. I wasn't going to waste time with texts. I got in my car and drove straight to my parents' house. The moment I walked into their house, I spotted Emily sitting with my mom and dad, chatting like nothing was wrong. I put the invitation down on the table in front of them. They all went silent. Emily had the nerve to act confused. She said it must have been a miscommunication, that she had assumed I'd eventually say yes. My parents didn't even try to deny it. They admitted they sent out the invitations early because they were sure I would change my mind. That's when I laid it out for them in very clear terms. If anyone showed up at my house for that wedding, I would call the police for trespassing. That's when the gaslighting started. My mom put her hand on her chest like I had just said the most offensive thing in the world. My dad shook his head in disappointment. They went on about how I was overreacting and how I should feel honored to host my sister's wedding. Meanwhile, Emily was furious. She said I was ruining everything and that she had already told all her friends my house was the venue. Then came the best part. Jake, her fiancé, looked completely blindsided. He had no idea that I had never agreed to this. Emily had told him that I was completely on board. I turned to him and told him directly I never said yes to this. I told them no from the very beginning. Jake looked at Emily, completely stunned. He asked her if that was true. Emily refused to answer. That was all I needed to see. I walked out, but not before repeating, if anyone tried to use my house, I would not hesitate to get the authorities involved. By the time I got home, I wasn't taking any more chances. I changed the locks again. I installed additional security cameras. I hired a security team for the entire week leading up to the wedding. Word must have spread fast, because the next day my parents called me one last time. They begged me to reconsider, saying that so many people would be disappointed and that it was too late to change things now. I told them not my problem. They had plenty of time to book a real venue, but they had chosen to force me into this instead. Then came Emily's final meltdown. She screamed that she would never speak to me again if I didn't let her have the wedding at my house. She was so dramatic about it you'd think I had just burned her wedding dress in front of her. I responded with okay. And then I hung up. Despite their delusions, my family eventually had no choice but to find a new venue. And because they had wasted so much time trying to force me to cave, they ended up booking a last-minute, overpriced location. It was a disaster. It was rushed. Nothing was planned properly because they had spent all their time arguing with me instead of actually preparing. It went way over budget. The venue cost a fortune, and they had to pay extra fees to book everything on such short notice. Guests were confused. Because they had already sent out invitations with my address, many people showed up at my house anyway. Yes, you read that right. Even with all my warnings, some guests still came to my house on the wedding day. The security team I hired turned them away immediately and let them know the wedding was at a completely different venue. Once the wedding was over, my parents tried one last time to guilt trip me. They said the wedding wasn't what Emily wanted and that I had made everything so difficult for them. That I had been so stubborn over something that didn't even matter. As if my entire home wasn't something that mattered. I didn't respond. I blocked them. And for the first time in a long time I felt completely at peace. The wedding happened. And just as expected, it was a complete disaster. Because they had wasted so much time trying to manipulate me instead of actually planning. They were forced to book a last-minute venue that was overpriced, poorly prepared, and far from what Emily had imagined. The decorations were rushed. The venue wasn't even fully set up by the time guests arrived. The catering was late. There weren't enough meals for everyone, and some people had to wait over an hour for food. The seating was a mess. Some guests didn't even have places to sit, because they overbooked the space. The photographer left early. Apparently, he had only been paid for a short time, and when his time was up, he packed up and left. But the best part? The venue didn't allow loud music after a certain hour, so the wedding ended much earlier than planned. Emily was furious. And guess who got the blame? Me. The very next day, Emily and my mom went on a Facebook rampage. Emily posted a long, dramatic status about certain family members who deliberately sabotaged her happiness. My mom chimed in about how some people don't understand what family is supposed to mean. They both liked and responded to comments from people calling me selfish, cold-hearted, and a disgrace. Of course, they didn't name me directly, but everyone knew who they were talking about. Then the texts started rolling in. A few relatives reached out to tell me I should be ashamed for ruining Emily's big day. One even said I should have just let her have the house because family should come first. At the same time, other relatives, ones who actually had some sense, reached out to tell me they supported my decision. Some even admitted that Emily and my parents had completely lost it. It was like my family had split into two teams. Team OP was right. The ones who knew my family was full of entitled lunatics. Team Emily deserves everything. The ones who acted like I had committed some kind of crime. And right in the middle of it all, Jake. A couple of days later, Jake messaged me privately. He apologized for everything. He said he had no idea that Emily had lied to him about me agreeing to the wedding. He admitted that he should have spoken to me directly instead of trusting her. But the most interesting part, he didn't sound happy. From what I gathered, Emily had been lashing out at him non-stop ever since the wedding. She was blaming him for not helping her convince me to hand over my house. I didn't say much in response, but it was pretty clear Jake was realizing exactly what kind of person he was engaged to. A week after the wedding disaster, my parents tried to play nice. They sent me a message saying they missed me and that family shouldn't let one misunderstanding ruin everything. But here's the thing, they never apologized, not for trying to force me into giving up my house, not for lying to people, not for encouraging Emily's tantrums, not for calling me selfish. They just wanted to pretend none of it ever happened. I ignored their message. Then I heard a rumor that made my blood boil. A distant relative mentioned in passing that my parents were considering legal action against me for emotional distress. Yes, you read that right. They were thinking about suing me because I wouldn't let them use my house. Now, I didn't take it seriously, because they had no case. No legal argument. Nothing. It was just another pathetic intimidation tactic. But it was enough for me to finally cut them off completely. After that, I went completely no contact. I blocked my parents. I blocked Emily. I blocked every flying monkey that tried to guilt trip me. I was done. Completely done. And Emily's life was falling apart. With the overpriced venue, rushed planning, and everything else that went wrong, Emily and my parents were stuck with a massive bill. Emily had expected my parents to cover the costs, but when they couldn't, she was stuck with bills she never planned for. She had drained her savings, maxed out credit cards, and taken out personal loans, all for a wedding that fell apart. Without steady work to pay it off, she was spiraling, and who did she blame? Me. According to her, if I had just let her use my house, none of this would have happened. It didn't matter that I had told her no from the beginning. It didn't matter that she had lied to everyone about my agreement. It didn't matter that she refused to book a proper venue in time. In her mind, it was all my fault. But for the first time, I didn't care. Weeks later, after I ignored another guilt-tripping message, my parents made it official. They disowned me. They sent a final message telling me I had turned my back on my family, that I had chosen selfishness over love and loyalty, that I was no longer their son. I read the message once. I won't lie, it stung. Even after everything, a part of me had hoped they would realize how wrong they were. But no, they had made their choice. I took a deep breath, deleted the message, and reminded myself why I had set these boundaries in the first place. Peace came slowly, but it came. I had protected my home, my boundaries, and my peace. And I wouldn't change a thing. Now, before anyone asks, no, I will never speak to them again. Emily made her choices. My parents made their choices. And I made mine. And honestly, I have never been happier. Weeks passed after my parents officially disowned me. I had blocked them, ignored their attempts to reach out, and fully moved on. Or so I thought. Then, one morning, I opened my mailbox and found a letter from a lawyer. I wasn't expecting it, but at this point, nothing surprised me anymore. I received a letter from a lawyer, though not one from any firm I recognized. It turned out my parents had scraped together just enough money to hire a small-time attorney who specialized in empty threats. The letter claimed they were suing me for emotional distress and financial losses related to Emily's wedding. My lawyer barely took it seriously. They were actually trying to make me pay for the wedding disaster. The letter detailed how my refusal to let them use my house had caused unnecessary financial burden and emotional hardship. It stated that Emily's wedding had gone over budget because they were forced to book a last-minute venue. My actions had intentionally caused distress to the entire family. They expected me to cover the financial damage. The amount, $25,000. It was insane. I had never been sued before. I had no idea what to do. At first, there was a brief moment of panic. Was this something they could actually pull off? I wasn't going to take any chances. I immediately hired a lawyer. I met with my lawyer, a no-nonsense guy who looked over the letter and barely even reacted. They don't have a case, he said almost immediately. He explained that their lawsuit was pure nonsense. There was no legal basis for them to sue me over a wedding I had nothing to do with. He assured me that no judge would take this seriously, but still, it needed to be dealt with properly. His advice? We send them a firm legal response and shut this down fast. Right around the time my lawyer was drafting the response, Emily had another Facebook meltdown. This time, she didn't even try to be subtle. She posted a long, dramatic rant about how she was being forced to take legal action against her own sibling because of selfishness. She claimed that her wedding had been ruined and that it had left her in a financial nightmare. People flooded the comments, and it was the same as before, some friends sympathizing, others calling her out for being entitled. Oddly enough, Jake was silent. After Emily's post, relatives started reaching out again. Some told me I should just settle to keep the peace. Others were actually laughing at how ridiculous the lawsuit was. One cousin messaged me just to say, "Are they serious? This is embarrassing." My lawyer sent a firm response, pointing out that their case had no legal standing. He even cited a similar case where a claim of emotional distress over a family dispute had been laughed out of court. If they proceeded, we would countersue for harassment and legal fees. A few days later, they quietly dropped the case. It had never been serious, just another attempt at intimidation. Their lawsuit had never been serious. It was a scare tactic. They had hoped that just the threat of legal action would make me give in. When it didn't work, they backpedaled fast. But at that point, I was beyond done. This was the moment I realized there was no coming back from this. I unblocked my parents long enough to send one message. This was the final straw. Do not contact me again. You tried to manipulate me, then tried to sue me, and now you're crawling back when it didn't work. I am officially done. You are out of my life. Goodbye. Then I blocked them again. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt, no second guessing, just relief. Not long after, I started hearing rumors about Jake. People noticed that he hadn't been liking or commenting on any of Emily's wedding posts. His social media was quiet. He wasn't engaging in any of the drama. Then I got a message from a mutual acquaintance. Jake was thinking about calling off the engagement. Apparently, the wedding disaster had been a wake-up call. The entitlement, the manipulation, the way Emily had handled the entire situation, it had started pushing him away. And when he found out about the lawsuit, that might have been the breaking point. Then, completely out of nowhere, Emily reached out to me. She was sobbing. Her entire attitude had changed. No more screaming, no more demanding, just pure desperation. She begged me to help her fix things with Jake. She said she knew she had messed up and just wanted him back. She wanted me to talk to him and explain that she wasn't actually a bad person. I didn't even hesitate. I told her the truth. I told her that she had done this to herself, that she had spent months trying to manipulate, lie, and force people to give her what she wanted, that she had tried to steal my home, turn the entire family against me, and then sue me when I didn't cave. And now, she had to live with the consequences. I ended the conversation and blocked her, and that was it. For the first time in years, there was no more family drama hanging over my head, no more manipulative texts, no more guilt-tripping phone calls, no more social media meltdowns directed at me. I had finally cut them all out for good, and the best part, I had never been more at peace. The dust had barely settled from the lawsuit stunt when I got a text from an old mutual friend. Dude, the wedding is OFF. I checked social media, and sure enough, Jake and Emily's engagement had been wiped from existence. No more wedding countdown posts. No more hashtags about their forever. Jake's relationship status had gone from engaged to nothing. Emily, she had erased every picture of him. Then, just hours later, she posted another dramatic Facebook rant. Emily's post was vague but full of accusations. She talked about betrayal and how some people just love to ruin others' happiness. She said she had been used, manipulated, and discarded. But the biggest part, she strongly implied that Jake and I had somehow conspired against her. That was the moment I knew she had completely lost it. Not long after, I got a message from a friend who knew Jake. Jake had ended things because of Emily's entitlement and behavior. The wedding disaster had been the final straw, but apparently, he had been thinking about leaving for a while. The manipulation, the constant demands, the way she expected everything to go her way, he had been putting up with it for too long. And then, when he found out about the lawsuit against me, that was it. He realized exactly who he was about to marry, and decided he couldn't do it. A few days later, Jake reached out to me. His message was short, but it said everything. He thanked me. Not directly, but it was clear, he had finally seen what Emily was really like, and he was grateful he got out before it was too late. As soon as my parents realized Jake had actually left Emily, they went into full meltdown mode. They reached out to me for the first time since the lawsuit failed, not to apologize, not to make amends, but to demand I fix this. Emily was distraught. Emily was ruined. Emily had been left all alone. They acted like her world had ended, and it was somehow my responsibility to put it back together. When I didn't respond, they got angrier. They said I had pushed Jake away and poisoned him against Emily. I ignored every single message. As expected, relatives jumped in. Some said I should at least try to talk to Emily and help her through this tough time. Others outright accused me of destroying her happiness and told me I should make things right. One aunt even suggested I should talk to Jake and convince him to reconsider. I blocked all of them. After being ignored by everyone, Emily tried one last time. She sent me a long, dramatic email. It was pure manipulation. She blamed me for everything. She accused me of ruining her wedding, her relationship, and her life. She demanded an apology. I didn't even bother responding. I deleted it and moved on. When she realized I wasn't going to engage, she completely turned against me. She started telling everyone that I was a monster. She warned people to cut contact with me. She made up stories about how I had always hated her and wanted to see her fail. Honestly, I couldn't care less. Now, Emily was stuck with all the wedding expenses and deposits, the non-refundable venue, the already paid caterers, the dress, the decorations, the invitations, and because she had expected my parents to pay for most of it, and they were already struggling financially, she was drowning in debt. She had no backup plan. And that's when my parents really started panicking. With Emily spiraling, my parents did what they always do. They tried to drag me back into their mess. Suddenly, they weren't disowning me anymore. They started sending messages, talking about how families should support each other in difficult times. They begged me to help Emily just this once because she was struggling so much. They acted like all the past drama didn't exist, like they hadn't tried to steal my house, sued me, and disowned me. I responded one final time. Emily is an adult. She made her choices. She can deal with the consequences. Then, I blocked them again. And just like that, I was free. No more manipulative texts. No more forced family obligations. No more guilt tripping. For the first time, I was completely done. And honestly, it felt amazing. Months had passed. No drama, no guilt tripping, no ridiculous lawsuits. Silence. It had been long enough that I almost started believing it was over for good. Then, out of nowhere, Emily messaged me. It was short, just a simple, "Hey, I'd really like to talk." At first, I ignored it. After everything she had done, the house, the wedding, the lawsuit, the accusations, what could she possibly have to say? But curiosity got the better of me. I figured maybe, just maybe, she had finally grown up. So, I agreed to a quick phone call. Big mistake. Emily's voice was calm at first, but there was an edge to it, like she was rehearsing a speech she didn't fully believe. She said she regretted how things had gone, but when I didn't immediately agree to help, her tone grew sharper. "After everything, you really don't care," she demanded, her fake remorse cracking into frustration. She slipped right back into old habits. She brought up how family should stick together. She talked about how she was going through a rough time. She even said she wished I could just forgive and forget. Then came the real reason for the call. She wanted money. She admitted she was struggling financially. The wedding disaster had left her with a pile of debt, and because my parents were just as broke, they couldn't bail her out. She told me she was desperate. She asked me for a loan. She actually expected me to give her money after everything. She tried to justify it, saying I owed her, that if I had just let her use my house, none of this would have happened, that if I hadn't turned Jake against her, she wouldn't be struggling right now. She acted like I was the reason her life had fallen apart. I almost laughed. I reminded her of a few key facts. She tried to steal my house. She lied to everyone. She dragged me through a fake lawsuit. She made me the villain in her sob story. And now, she wanted my help. I told her no. That's when she snapped. The second she realized I wasn't falling for it, her entire tone changed. The fake kindness, gone. The pretend apology, gone. She went full meltdown mode. She accused me of being selfish, heartless, and cruel. She said I was just like our parents, and that I'd never find happiness because I was a cold, miserable person. Then, she hung up. I blocked her immediately. Not even 2 hours later, I got an email from my mom. It was exactly what I expected. She went on about how Emily was struggling mentally, and that I should do the right thing and help her. She said that no matter what had happened in the past, Emily was still my sister, that family should always be there for each other, that I was better off financially, so I should step up. I replied one last time. I told them Emily was an adult, that her choices were her own, that I was not responsible for her life. Then, I blocked them again. After that, Emily sent one last message, a full all-caps meltdown. She called me a monster. She said I had destroyed her life. She said she wished she had never had a brother. Then, she blocked me. For the first time ever, she was the one who cut contact. And I couldn't have been happier. For the first time in my life, I felt like it was really over. No more manipulation. No more fake apologies. No more guilt tripping. This time, it felt real. To celebrate, I took a weekend trip with some close friends. I didn't think about Emily. I didn't think about my parents. I didn't think about any of it. For the first time in years, I felt completely free. Of course, some distant family members still tried. A few random aunts and uncles messaged me out of nowhere, saying I should find it in my heart to fix things. I ignored every single one. And that's it. Emily is out of my life. For the first time ever, I don't feel trapped in their drama, and I've never been happier. Nearly a year passed without any drama. Then, out of nowhere, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Emily had started dating someone new. At first it seemed casual, until she suddenly announced an engagement just a few months later. Given how quickly everything had fallen apart before, people were skeptical. Apparently she had met someone new and moved fast. Really fast. The guy, a man she had been dating for barely 3 months, and now they were engaged. She had wiped every trace of Jake from her life, and was acting like none of the past year's drama had ever happened. My parents? Over the moon. They celebrated like this was her first engagement. No mention of Jake. No mention of the wedding disaster. No mention of the lawsuit, the failed manipulation, or the financial meltdown. It was like they had hit the reset button on reality. It didn't take long before I started hearing stories. Emily was already treating her new fiancé the same way she had treated Jake. She was making grand wedding plans with no budget, demanding financial help from my parents, rushing every major decision like there was a deadline. And of course she was expecting another massive Instagram-worthy wedding. She called it her do-over. She told people she deserved a real wedding this time, meaning one where I didn't sabotage her. Then, one day I got a text from my parents. It was an invitation to Emily's wedding. No apology, no acknowledgement of the past. Just a simple, hope you can make it. They were acting like everything was normal, like I hadn't been disowned, sued, called a monster by my own sister. It was beyond ridiculous. I ignored the invite without hesitation. Word got out that I had no plans to attend. Some relatives understood immediately, others, not so much. Some called me petty. Some said I should let the past go. Some even tried to guilt trip me again. I didn't care. I was done. Not long after, Emily started posting her classic vague Facebook rants again. Things like, "It's sad when some people can't be happy for others. Certain people don't understand what family means. This time, nothing will ruin my happiness." She was dying for attention. But for the first time, I didn't care. Out of nowhere, Jake messaged me. He had heard about the new engagement and couldn't believe it. He found it hilarious. He wasn't surprised. He knew Emily wouldn't change. He joked that her new fiancé had no idea what he was in for. And honestly, I agreed. As the wedding got closer, the same problems started happening. Emily had no real budget. She expected my parents to cover everything. She wanted an extravagant venue but had no way to afford it. And just like before, things started to fall apart. Then, I heard a very familiar rumor. Emily's fiancé was having doubts. He was overwhelmed by the wedding demands. He was starting to see how entitled she was. He was realizing she expected him to fund a lifestyle he couldn't afford. Sound familiar? I wasn't betting on the wedding happening at all. If this guy had even half of Jake's common sense, he'd be running soon. Despite all the signs, my parents refused to admit anything was wrong. They insisted Emily was happy. They told people this time would be different. They were delusional, but this time, I stayed silent. And that's when I realized I no longer cared. Emily's life? Not my problem. My parents' delusions? Not my problem. The family drama? Not my problem. For the first time, I felt truly free, and I was never looking back. Months turned into a year, and for the first time in my life, I had complete peace. No more texts. No more flying monkeys. No more guilt trips. I had officially gone full no contact with my parents, and Emily, blocked, deleted, gone. Without their constant chaos, I finally got to focus on what mattered. My home. The house they tried to steal from me. Now, it was truly mine. No one telling me what to do with it. No one acting like they had a right to it. Just peace. My work. Without stress dragging me down, I was actually excelling in my career. More energy, more focus, better results. My hobbies. I got back into the things I actually enjoyed. Hiking, traveling, and even some home improvement projects. Everything felt lighter. The best part? The people who actually respected me. I spent more time with friends who didn't expect anything from me, didn't try to manipulate me, actually enjoyed my company, without ulterior motives. Turns out, real relationships don't revolve around guilt and obligation. Who would have thought? Of course, even though I was done with Emily, she wasn't done being well. Emily. Every once in a while I'd hear about her latest disaster. Her new engagement. Over. The guy broke it off. Apparently, he got tired of her financial expectations and realized she was only with him for the wedding fantasy. Her job situation. A mess. She had burned through savings, tried to get our parents to fund her life again, and when that didn't work, she looked for another savior to leech off. Her reputation? Not great. More and more people were seeing her true colors. The entitlement, the manipulation. It wasn't just me. It was a pattern. But the difference? I wasn't involved. Not my problem. Not my circus. Not my monkeys. For the first time in my life, I wasn't walking on eggshells. I wasn't constantly waiting for the next disaster. I wasn't dreading another phone call. I wasn't bracing for the next guilt trip. I was free. Looking back, cutting them off was the best decision I ever made. I could have given in, let Emily use my house, spent years being the family's emotional and financial punching bag, but I didn't. I stood my ground, and now, I had zero regrets. Some people think that family is everything, that you should always forgive, no matter what, that you should sacrifice your happiness for them, just because you share blood. But the truth, sometimes, family isn't worth the stress. One day, I decided to check my old social media. There were still some distant relatives lingering. A few people who had sided with Emily, still watching. I blocked them all, deleted any lingering connections. That was the last tiny thread still connecting me to the past, and the moment I hit confirm, it was gone. Months later, I heard Emily was at it again. She had moved on to a new target, a guy with money, someone she was already trying to fast-track into another engagement. The same pattern, the same manipulation, the same entitlement. She had learned nothing. And honestly, I didn't care. Thinking back, the best decision I ever made was not letting her in, not letting my parents pressure me, not giving in. If I had, I'd probably still be stuck in their drama. But now, my home was truly mine. Safe, untouched, drama-free. To celebrate, I booked a trip. Somewhere I had always wanted to go. Somewhere far away from family nonsense. It felt like a final, official goodbye to all of it. And just like that, the chapter closed. I stopped thinking about them. I stopped wondering what they were doing. I stopped caring. For the first time, I felt completely at peace. Looking back, I saw everything clearly. The manipulation, the entitlement, the toxic cycles, and most importantly, I saw that I had made the right choice. No regrets, no second thoughts, just peace. And for the first time in my life, I was truly happy.